So once all of those 4 or 8 file types are submitted to CALPADS, uh, of course, part of we discussed the subgroups and all of those, but all of those are reflected in the certification reports. And the certification reports is part of the certification process, which I will be demoing for the next hour. Okay, so please bear with me. For those who are, seasoned veterans, this might bore you. For those who are new, this could be interesting, action-packed, or some expectation of the process that you will be encountering from now up to December 13. Okay, so the certification process, of course, is this area here. So this is the entire workflow that you are expected to go through during the Fall 1 submission. Of course, you've submitted your files either through batch file or online maintenance. You uploaded them to the CalPads portal, either through from your CIS or from your SEDS. And then, of course, if CalPads doesn't like the formatting and it's missing some of the data, that file is then rejected, right? And so you then conduct the iterative process of correcting data in your CIS, extracting a new file, and then uploading it back until you've reduced those errors to 0. And now, obviously, the file will then be accepted into the system, because CalPads will not accept any files that are rejected. In prior years, I think 3 years ago, we could accept partial postings, but I think since we've introduced the post redesign, any rejected record will outright reject the entire file. So anyway, once all of the files pass the input validation process, it is then stored in the ODS system, or the CalPAS online data storage. And so that's why we have the ODS reports. Okay. So the ODS reports is reflective of the data that is current, that you've posted in the system. The ODS reports is reflective of the data that you've posted probably an hour ago. Okay, because now the ODS reports theoretically should reflect any new data that you've posted, in an instant, right? But give it an hour, and it should reflect the records that you've posted in real time. And then, of course, the ODS store will also generate extracts. The extract is reflective of the raw data that is in the data store. So the extracts can be downloaded based on file types, right? And then, of course, we have here the data discrepancy processing. So this is the next step of validations that CalPAS will generate based on the files that were posted directly in the ODS, right? So the data discrepancy will then, trigger any errors if there are still missing components that are expected for the certification process, or invalid combinations of data, invalid data in relation to other file types, right? So this is where the data discrepancy process occurs, and we will discuss the user interfaces that you will go through. And then, of course, you have your real-time anomaly detection. So this section here, once your enrollment data is in CalPADS, the system will then try to do an anomaly validation, right? It will try to check if your student has multiple SSIDs. It will check if if you're enrolling a student who was exited in the prior year or prior LEA to be a dropout, right? So there are discrepancies on that. Or if you're submitting an enrollment for a student who was already reported as graduate, or if you have an overlapping enrollment with your neighboring district, or or other districts within California. So this is basically the next layer of process that CalPads that your data has to go through. Okay, so once if you so this process will continue. This will be running every day, 365 days of the year. Now, for the certification process, the certification, your snapshot reports, your CDDs, this will only be visible once CalPads is activates the submission process or the snapshot process for a certain submission period. So for fall one, it's census day, right? So yesterday, we've activated the snapshot process, and you should be able to see your snapshot revisions, your certification reports. Now, any data discrepancy error that was not resolved in this layer will then manifest as a CDD. So CalPads will just prevent you from certifying until you make sure that your data discrepancies are corrected. Okay. So once all of these are corrected, of course, you review the reports, right? And now once you've reviewed the reports, you then click on LEA Approve, and then that will trigger a notification to your SELPA to review their side of your reports. So they will, on their side, you will have, since the SELPA is involved with determining accuracy of SPED data, they will have a version of the SPED reports, 16.12, I believe, up to 16.19. And so they will review that. If they agree with all of your data, then of course they will click on the SELPA approval, and that would be your final certification step. Now, if your SELPA sees discrepancies, they will relay the message to you, and in turn, you will make the corrections, wait for a new snapshot to be activated or to be generated to reflect the changes on the reports. And then your SELPA will again review that. And then if they agree this time, then you will have a SELPA approval, and that would then be your final step for fall one. All of this should be done. Ideally, your SELPA, you should have a SELPA approval by December 13. However, December 13, the expectation is you should at least be LEA approved on December 13. However, even if you're LEA approved, make sure that you have all of your SPED data in CalPads. If there are some inaccuracies, hopefully it should just be minimal. And then that would also help with your SPED disproportionality. You would then be able to see your P1 calculations on December 13. Okay. All right. And so that's basically the entire story of the certification process. Let me go here to our demo and show you the actual process that LEAs go through, right? So to be able to access the certification process, you need to click on the certification status page. For you to have access to this, you need to have the necessary roles. You need to have the data certification role, and of course, you need to have the reports role for fall one. Okay, and then later on, we will be discussing the data discrepancy section. So you should at least have both the edit and the view roles for those specific file types that would trigger errors in the data discrepancy page. Okay, so here is your certification LEA approval. We are in our test environment. So hopefully our test environment is stable this time, and so there won't be any delays. And if not, the reason why Nate wants me to always do the demo. All right, so let's click on the fall one. Of course, if you want to look at your fall one certification status, you click on this link. However, I just want to highlight some areas here. that you need to also be aware of. So you have here your LEA, your submission code, your revision status, submission create date, your certification status, if you're certified or not. The only time this will show certified is if your revision status is self-approved. Okay. And then, of course, you have your total warnings, you have your total fatal errors that you need to resolve before CALPADS allows you to certify, or before you look into your certification reports. And then you have your anomaly percent. Okay. So the anomaly percent would be dictated by the amount of anomalies you have in your anomalies management user interface. Okay. So the anomalies percent will include any anomalies you have for MIDs, if you have multiple SSIDs, and for CCEs. Only CCEs and MIDs are accounted in this percentage. ERDs are not. So if both are cleared and you still have ERDs, that's fine. You may still continue to go ahead and certify, right? But the anomalous percentage, CalPADS will allow it up to 2%. Or if your anomaly percentage is 2% and above, CalPADS will prevent you from certifying. Okay? So it is important that you resolve your MIDs, your CCEs, if possible, bring it down to 0. But sometimes there are scenarios where there are instances where you need a student may be in two different LEAs because of parent arrangements. So if that's the case, then you, you may afford to have anomaly percentage here, but not above 2%. Okay, so let's move on to the submission section. If I click on Fall 1 here, it brings up the certification details page. Okay, so we have 5 sections here. You have your summary. You have the section that identifies who your SELPA is, who will be doing the second approval. You have the section where you have all of the certification validations or CDDs and CERT errors that you need to resolve. You have the section for the certification reports that you need to go through one by one. And then you have a snapshot history that details all of the snapshots that was triggered for your LEA ever since Fall 1 snapshot was activated. So it provides you the different revision IDs, the statuses for each snapshot, and then of course, any total errors that you have. And so for us, since Nate mentioned every LEA has their own assigned CSIS monitor. As a CSIS monitor, we will be able to see if you guys have been doing the work based on the progress or the reduction of errors here. If since census day, since yesterday, or since your snapshot was activated, your errors continue to be high and continue to be consistent, then that's triggering red flags for us. Okay. All right. So before I move on to each of these details, I want to point out some areas of consideration in the CalPADS user manual. So there is a section in the user manual. Again, if you want to go to the user manual, I forgot, go to help, click on user manual here, and it should bring you to the user manual section. So, but let me just go to the shareable document here. So in the user manual, you have, of course, the Fall 1 roadmap. If you haven't read this yet, please do so. It gives you a summary of what to expect for Fall 1 submission. It also gives you that submission checklist that you could, this one, the submission checklist. This provides you a framework of the task at hand. So you could even involve other departments in here. You could give them dates of deadlines. That way, you will have a chance to at least meet the December 2nd milestone of 0 errors, right? So the checklist is this. So you have here, you could identify what department is responsible. You could also identify when that data elements were submitted and posted and completed. You could even add a column here and add expected timeline for you guys, internal timeline. So it gives you all of the expected data you have to report in CalPads. It also provides you the different reports to look at, to certify. And then you also have the timeline here. So Nate mentioned you need to resolve your errors before 12.2. If you have zero fatal errors starting 12.2, then you have a higher success rate of being able to have an accurate report, accurate certified data before census day. Okay, before the deadline, I mean. And then you also have the fall one quality check. This provides you additional information on what to look for each of the reports indicated here, right? So download this submission checklist. It's in this section here in CalPads. And then, of course, you have all of these communications and changes in CalPads. Another thing is on functionality map, certification status, there is what we call the certification status LEA section. It provides you the certification process, something that I am discussing right now. And then this hierarchy of available revisions. This is important when analyzing or figuring out the different default statuses in CalPads. So I'll use this in describing to you the process. Okay. Another thing is, of course, if later on you want to come back and or if you want to be able to look at a condensed version of this training, you just want to look at the certification side, there is a section in the YouTube channel, in our YouTube channel. Let me just go back to here. So click on this YouTube channel icon, and it brings you to our CSIS YouTube channel. And then under CalPads Intro and Basics, you have here the snapshot and revision. So let's click on that. So you have two versions of it. You have the long version, which Nate will be, wherein Nate demonstrates the same process I will be demonstrating right now. And then the snapshot revision, which is presented by Alex, it just provides you the cause and effect when toggling the revision status. Okay, so let's go back to my demo. So let's go to the first section here. Okay, the certification details. So you have here a summary of your data. You have your current revision ID. You have your revision create date, which is based on the latest snapshot that you received, and then your revised and certified. This is your revision status, revised and certified. Your certification status is uncertified. And then, of course, you have the CDD date, begin time, and completion date. This will be useful in the context of determining if any corrections you made on the CDD side was already picked up by the snapshot revision. Because these two areas, these two processes run in a different pace. Okay. So you also have your in-review status. This one, if you check this, this will enable you to freeze this data. So if you've brought this down to 0, your errors to 0, and you're in the process of sending out the reports to your stakeholders, to your supervisors, then you could freeze this That way, any changes introduced in CALPADS, because maybe your SPED are still assessing students and pushing data to CALPADS, um, and so any changes, to prevent those changes to alter this status, freeze this. That way, this version is frozen, and then once a new snapshot is generated, you will have a parallel revision here. So there is a in review uncertified, and you also have a revised uncertified version, which is reflective of the most recent snapshot that was generated for you. And so this then leads us back to the certification details page, right? Where you have all of these combinations. So by default, so the first line here would be the default status that will appear in your certification details. So if you are LEA approved and you're expecting a revised uncertified version, you need to toggle from LEA approved into the revised uncertified version. Okay, so that's basically how this functionality works. You also have here links to view the certification error report and the extract. So if you want to see the list of all of the students, all of the SSIDs that trigger the reports, the errors here, then this is the functionality that you need to go to. So you download the report, send it to different school sites so that they can fix the errors. Okay, or download that way you have a reference of what to fix, right? Okay, so we have here the CDD as well. CDD run and begin date and CDD run completion date. So this will tell us if the batch of data that is included in this snapshot in the context of your data discrepancies. Okay, so how do we go to our data discrepancy? On the left navigation pane, you have your data discrepancies. Okay, your data discrepancy. So these are two sections, right? So you have your certification, which has your errors. You also have data discrepancies that has the same amount of errors. So let me just click on apply filters. So if you can see, since I have not corrected anything yet, the amount of errors here will reflect the amount of errors here. Now, let's say I start fixing errors, and of course, the discrepancy starts running, because once you post any changes in CalPads, the CalPads will detect changes, and so it will start running your data discrepancy process, right? Data discrepancy run. So if this start time has a later date, let's say 11:03, and my snapshot has a date of my CDD run date has a timestamp of, let's say, 8 a.m., chances are your snapshot is behind. Okay, if you made changes here and the runtime is at 11 but your snapshot is at 8 p.m., then obviously your data discrepancy has a more recent status. So you have to wait for the snapshot to generate a new snapshot, and you have to check this. Okay, that way, that's the only way for you to determine if all the corrections you've made in your data discrepancies were picked up by this new snapshot revision. Okay.
If I could jump in, Kyron,
Yes, sir.
what Kyron's describing is a process and understanding that's very difficult for LEAs to grasp when they're new. So watching those videos that Kyron pointed to before he started his demonstration give you a detailed description of how the revisions and the snapshot works.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to emphasize that the DD discrepancies process more timely than your revisions. And that's kind of what Kyron's emphasizing, but this point is very important. Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Kyra.
Thank you, Nate. All right, so that's the section that you will be aware of the difference in between the run date and the data discrepancy date. Okay. All right, so also another thing, when you try to toggle between revisions, when you click on this and pick a revision, you have to be patient because CalPads, if you click this, if you click a different revision status, you have to just let CalPads run. Normally, you will see your browser spinning. The only time and then you'll know anyway because if you have a new revision create date and revision ID after you've switched, then that means the system switched to a different page because sometimes LEAs would get confused. How come, how come I try to switch and my revision create date and revision ID is still the same? That's because you didn't give CalPAS a chance to refresh the page for you. Okay. All right. So this is just a summary. Now let's go to the certification validation. So these are all the errors that may potentially trigger for you. This is what triggered for us. So let's go to the PowerPoint presentation because there are some errors that if if you are a seasoned veteran, so we've converted majority of the certification errors into a CDD now. Okay, so these are some of the list. However, if you want a more exhaustive list of the errors, you could go to the CalPAS error list. How do you go there? There are two ways to go there. One is if you're in the CalPADS site, there is the system documentation. There is a link to the CalPAS error list, right? However, we've discovered that CDE automatically points this to the same section in the user manual. Okay, so might as well be in the user manual, right? So if you are in the user manual, to go here, go to help and go to troubleshooting. So if you're a person who is comfortable in using the error list version or the Excel version of the error list, you may download it from here because this is the only area where you could download the error list spreadsheet now. You won't be able to download it from the CalPad side. Okay, so download it here. We're now in version 16.3. We've sent that up yesterday, implemented it. And then, of course, it will provide you all of the errors you have, either for each file type, and then you have for fall one. So these are the errors that is in the error list. Some may be, I think there's only 4 CERT errors that are active this year. The rest are inactive. Okay, so and then all of those inactive CERT errors are now converted into CDDs, and so that's why I showed you that conversion table. Okay. All right, so let's go back here to our certification page. So the fastest way to look at an error is by clicking on the error link here. Why? Because if I click on this, it directs me to the actual page that's in the user manual anyway, the same link that you had in here. Okay, so take advantage of that. And the good thing, the advantage of clicking on the link here is that if there are any potential defects, CalPAS will tell you here. Okay. All right. So, and this is for the CDD. Notice that the certification page has the same errors as the CDD. So, if you're working with CDD errors, it is better to go to the data discrepancy side and fix it there. Because as we've alluded to, the snapshot revision takes longer to refresh than this page here. Okay. However, we still, as I mentioned, we still have 4 certification errors that trigger. The first one is CERT1. CERT1 is stating that there are no enrollments for an expected open school. So what CALPADS does is that we have a list of expected schools every academic year. And so if you have not submitted an enrollment, any data for that school, you will get a CERT1. So if you have a school that does not have any enrollments this year, and you see a CERT1, we implore you to send in a service ticket right away telling us that this school does not have any enrollments in fall 1 or potentially for the rest of the year. And so tell us that, and tell us too that you want to remove this from the expected schools table. And how do you tell us that? You have to go scroll down here and create a ticket, right? So if you create a ticket here, it will bring you to our service request form. Make sure that you fill out all of the information. And of course, tell us the CDS code and the specific school that is causing the error. That way, it would be easier for CDE to remove that from the expected schools table. If you have a CERT1, please send a ticket right now, because sometimes it takes for a while for CDE to update that on their end. And so if you're just getting into correcting your CERT1, maybe two weeks before the deadline, there is a chance it would be resolved right away. There's a chance that you would be, having cold sweats because that's the only error left and you can't certify. So make sure you send in a ticket as soon as you see a CERT1. Okay? However, if you have a school that's triggering a CERT1 and you know that there are students enrolled at that school, then by all means send the required data to CALPADS. All right? So that's for CERT1. So let's go to the CDD errors, right? So let's look at two errors. You have your ethnicity and race data missing. So your CERT3 is now SENR0656F1. That's weird. There's two. All right, we're in test. There could be some issues here. Let's go to this instead. SINF 453F1. Missing parent guardian highest education level code. Okay, so it's telling us that you submitted the SINF record of the student. However, the parent guardian highest education level code is not populated. Okay, so how do we interpret this report, this error? Click on the error, and it provides you more details, right? So it says here, if you have a student enrolled in all other enrollment types, so 10, 20, 30, and then their parent guardian highest education level code must be populated. So take note, it only triggers for the parent guardian 1 highest level education field. Okay, so let's go back to this and go to click on show, right? So I click on the SSID, and then we have here Sriracha. Right, so Sriracha here, obviously they had an enrollment last year, and so it will trigger multiple errors, right? It will trigger the error saying, hey, you have not closed the enrollment from last year, please close that. And then of course, since this is an open enrollment, it then continues to validate and tell us, hey, you submitted a SINF record, however, you are missing the parent guardian ed level. So click on open and scroll to the bottom here, and true enough, the parent guardian 1 highest education level code is not populated. So what do? Then of course, you have to look at your SIS, populate the appropriate code, and then click on post. Now, if you have, let's say, 100, 200, 300, or 400 records, right, of errors for this issue, then maybe you may want to look at your SIS and see why. Or you may want to look at your SINF file and see why, right? Because if you have multiple layers here of race and ethnicity, and at least for this error, CalPADS will only look at the most recent enrolled SINF record that overlaps census day. So if prior to census day you've submitted a correct one, and then for some reason you extracted the file with a later date that overlaps census day, and that record is missing, then that's probably something with your process, with your extract process. Okay, so make sure that you correct those. So bottom line is, if you have a missing parent guardian ed level, then by all means populate that field here. So that these errors are also, again, as I've mentioned, in the data discrepancy section. Okay, so let's say you've corrected that error, right? Once you correct the error and you see that the discrepancy started running and completed, those errors will disappear from this list. Even if, let's say, you've corrected the error, right? So let me just do that just to show you. So if, let's say, I corrected Sriracha's parent guardian ed level, I say not high school graduate. Then of course I have to account for some other issues here for this student because he is missing his Hispanic ethnicity indicator. So I see that the student is Hispanic, although he loves spicy Asian condiments. Race code is a no because I know the race code, and then the student is ethnicity missing indicator. I say no because I know that the student is Hispanic. They identified the student as white. And then what else do I need here? Then I post. Okay, let's see if this would. So what did I do there, right? Since I resolved both the parent guardian level code and the race and ethnicity, I've corrected two CDDs with one go, right? So if I click on file submission, so you will have this notification that the file submission is in process. So if you're like me that want results right away and I'm impatient, I would go here and look at the status, right? So it says posted now, right? So it says posted. And so if I refresh this, I now have the race and ethnicity here, and then of course a parent guardian ed level. So what does that do in the context of the data discrepancy page? So what was that again? Anyway, if I click on this, and I have, what was the student's SSID? 6794. This step is actually unnecessary, but I just wanted to show you something. Just some tips and tricks. Oh, it went away. See how quick it is? Since we're in test, since we've corrected that, we don't have the error triggered for the student now, right? However, if I go to here, to my certifications page, I still see the student, right? So let's just refresh this for demonstration's sake. Fresh, hopefully the snapshot is slower. And then I go to Guardian Ed level. Okay, we still have 14, that's good. If I click on view here, no, that's not her. So anyway, what I'm trying to show you here is that sometimes if you made corrections and you click on view here for that specific SSID, or you're at data discrepancy and you have a and you click on view for that specific error, CalPads will just show you an error occurred pop-up. It should just say error occurred, and that's okay. That's just an indicator that you've corrected the error and it's on its way to getting included in your next snapshot. So if I click on view here and it says error occurred, that's because I fix it. Then that's an indicator that your correction is valid, and you just have to expect your snapshot to catch up and clear the errors on this side of the certification page. Okay, so that's basically a way to resolve issues. I'm doing it online because it's easier and we only have a few errors. However, if you have hundreds of errors, it would be more efficient for you to submit a batch file. And obviously that would probably be easier because it will correct majority of the errors at one go. Okay. But as a demonstration, if you want an interpretation of the error or description of the error, if there and also if there are issues with a specific error, so you try to correct an error and you can't make sense out of it because it turns out the data is correct, then go to the CalPads user to the known issues list here and check if that error is part of that of a active known issue. Okay, so I didn't trigger 1441, but anyway, there if you go here to the user manual troubleshooting, I think I have one example. So if you happen to have an SENR41 error, you should be able to have the active defects indicated there. Okay. So if let's say the active defect describes the scenario that you have for that student, then obviously you won't be able to correct the error. If you want to be notified of any updates with this defect, send in a ticket telling us that you have this error and it's potentially defect 6999, and then we will link your ticket to the actual problem management number. And once we deploy the fix, there will be an automated message telling you guys that the fix has that the issue has been resolved. Okay, so that's for resolving errors. So let's go back to the certification page here. So assuming you resolve all of this, you're now down to 0, right? The next
Kyron,
step, yes.
I don't know if you saw in chat,
Oh, who's that?
someone requested if you could show how to resolve the SENR 0656F1 error, missing student initial US school enrollment date.
Oh, yeah. Let's see here.
I don't know if we have the error, but it's easy enough to show how to fix.
We do. Oh, SENR06F1.
0656F1, it's missing initial US school enrollment date.
All right. So I don't have that error here, but let's look at an SIN one student that has an SINF. Where was that?
For the most recent SINF that overlaps census day.
Yeah. So since we don't have that error generated here, let me just go to the error definition.
SENR 0656 F1.
Okay. So SNR 0656F1 is stating that you have the missing student initial US enrollment date missing, right, in your SINF. So the error, this is the tricky part here. The error is an SENR, so normally you would say, oh, If it's an SENR, it's something on the SENR side, right? But that's not the case. Sometimes, you know, we try to keep you on your toes, unfortunately.
We
But
argue, but the
yeah,
developers insisted it's a SENR.
yeah,
We wish it would point
to
to
the
the
SINF.
to the missing
Hmm.
information,
Yep.
but for whatever reason, requirements and developers overruled us. So that's the tricky part of the error.
Yeah. So what this states is that if you have a student who is actively enrolled and are in grade levels TK to 12 on census day and who is an EL, then the student initial US enrollment date must be populated. Okay, so let's look at one student that had an SINF error.
And if you go back to that description at the very bottom, there's a key element.
There you go. Right.
The last sentence, it will tell you that the record you're looking for is the one that overlaps census day.
That's correct. So look for the SINF record that overlaps census day. And then the caveat here is that um, you have to look at the earliest TK enrollment date. Okay. So yeah, we should have triggered that. Forgot. Let's see here.
I think if you just look at any record, we could kind of talk through it.
Yeah. Let's go to one. Because we have this. Okay, let's go back to this student. All right, so we have one student catch up. You just pretend. Let me just do an inspect element. Okay, so you have here demographics. So what does this say? Let's just assume this is the student, right? The student is EL. Let's just assume this is EL. And then the demographic record is missing this. See again, the most recent active record overlapping census day, right? Since we only have one here, this means we have to submit an SINF record, but aside from that, making sure that the student has an initial US enrollment date in that SINF record. So and this error will only trigger for students who are EL, right? So if this is EL and you have the SINF missing this field, then that's when the error will trigger. Now the question is, what date do you need to use? The date should be the earliest date between TK and 12 for that student. All right. So if this is TK, then obviously pick that date. But then since this student only started as 12 grade, then that would be the enrollment start date that you indicate in here.
And if
Now, yeah,
I'm sorry,
go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to cut you off. If I may, if this was a 12th grade student who had multiple schools, you may have multiple pages to cycle through.
Yeah.
And so that's something to look for with transient students is it says one. Sometimes you have to click the arrow and go through multiple pages and find the earliest, like Kyron said, TK, not preschool, not infant. So you got to look at the grade level and then the enrollment start date. Sorry, Kyron.
No, that's good. Another thing, which is when you're more comfortable with CalPads down the road, if you want to have this is a good resource for you to refer to as well. So if, let's say at the start of the year, you have issues with this, because the CDDs, again, the data discrepancies runs at the start of the year. So let's say at the start of the year, you've submitted your data, go here to the data discrepancies and then start chipping away the errors, right? So to be able to have a mass reference of the US initial enrollment date, the trick is to download your SSID extract, pick date range, use, let's say, the first day of school up to today, and then request file. Okay. Hopefully we have a quick generation of this. Okay, so I've requested that, right? So let's go here. I think I have some copies of this. Let's go to an example for this. Then we have the file there. Obviously, you won't be able to interpret this extract because it's in text file. So the best process is to go back to help, go to the batch file templates download, go to extract templates, download the SSID extract template, right? So let me go to my folder here, and then under my downloads, I look for the SSID extract template. So once I download the file, I go to downloads, right? I pick the SSID extract template, and it will automatically bring us to this file here. So see how Sriracha is here, as well as Ketchup. If you are inheriting the student from other LEAs, you can already have a head start on who you need a earliest enrollment date populated. How? By looking at their English language status, right? If you have a TBD, since more often than not, the student might either be an EL or IFEP, it doesn't matter. You may need to test it. You may need to populate the initial US enrollment date, right? So there are two columns here that is useful for you. So if the earliest enrollment start date, K to 12, is this, and this is not populated and they're not the same, always refer to this, to column Q. So let me just, so see how normally the initial US enrollment date should be the same, right? Should be consistent because you're looking at the TK to 12. So this should be the same all the time, right? However, if there is a discrepancy, always point to this because this is what's in CALPADS. This is the earliest KN date or TK date for the student. So that's, and then of course, if you have a TBD, then by all means, that's an indicator of who are the students you need to put a initial US enrollment date. And also for either TBD or EL, okay? If you've inherited the student from a different district and you have here, like this one, this kid here, EL, then you have to populate the initial US enrollment for this student. So that's a more efficient way to anticipate the students that will need the initial US enrollment start date value. Okay. All right. So I hope we didn't confuse you with that. But anyway, so that's corrected, right? We've corrected all of this. So now that we've resolved the issues, you now have to go to your reports and review all of these reports. Okay. Once all of the aggregate reports have a green check mark, then that's the only time wherein CalPAS will bring out a tiny box here that you need to check your data is accurate by your admission. And then once that is checked, you have to click on the LEA Approve button here. That will come up. The LEA Approve button will not appear, or even this will be deactivated or grayed out until you've reviewed all of these aggregate reports, and that's the minimum amount of reports you need to review. It doesn't make sense for you to just look at the counts and not look at the aggregate reports, and that's why again we tell you to make sure that you have 0 errors by December 2nd. That way you have 2 weeks to be able to review your reports, right? And so Because it doesn't make sense for you to start looking at your reports, reviewing it, if you still have fatal errors here. Because even if you review the report's CALPADS, number one, will not include the students in the report, and number two, you won't be able to certify. All right, so once you review the reports, you then go to click on LEA Approve. CALPADS will then notify your CELPA. Your CELPA, on the other hand, will then go to their end and review the reports and then approve it. So that's basically the process of certifying your data, of the certification process, correcting errors, CDDs, CERT errors, reviewing reports, and approving the data in CALPADS. Okay, so bottom line is you need to be LEA approved by December 13th. Okay, I mean, December 13th is Friday the 13th. I wouldn't be on the bad side of that day. I would want to be lucky on that day and be already certified, right? I wouldn't be on the opposite side of that, of Friday the 13th if I were you. So, of course, we will discuss the certification, the report side, and Nate will provide you more details on each of the important reports that has to be certified.